Pre-cut 2x4 logs, machine manufactured wire nails. That's what happens. This is how we live. 16-inch on center studs. And what they realized, they're originally called balloon frame. It's a derisive term. These things are going to fall down. They're hollow, right? This turns out to be an extraordinarily strong way of building a house, because the load of the house is distributed so widely. And it also turns out to be very good in wind to move. Chicago becomes the place where this is happening, to the point that the great white pine forests of Michigan and Wisconsin are actually deforested in order to feed this market. Some of that wood being used to construct homes in Chicago, but also all over the world. So I dare say that if you have houses that were built here in the late 19th century, probably those studs are white pine 2x4s that came out of Wisconsin and Michigan, were cut in mills there, transported through Chicago and brought here. By the late 19th century, the depletion has been such that they start building or start harvesting yellow pine in the southeast. But this is one of the things also that happens here. One of the reasons there's such a demand for housing, Chicago burns down. 1871, the Great Chicago Fire. I'm sure we'll learn about this summer. Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicks over a lantern, sets the town on fire. An extraordinary scale. Here's the city of Chicago. This reveals the part that was burned. Now, absolutely devastating, extraordinary loss of life, the destruction of property on an unimaginable scale. This is a city of 350,000 people. Second largest city in the country at the time. And it basically all or most of it burns. In other ways, this would prove to be a great boon to Chicago. Because part of what happens, like if you go to New York or other older cities, is a lot of the kind of old colonial city with the narrow streets and all of that is still in place. Chicago actually gets to start in many areas from scratch. And they're able to do some really quite remarkable things. They actually are able to try to plan a city. This is a guy, Daniel Burnham. You'll see his footprint in Chicago this summer. He's an architect, and he's a city planner, and he devises a great plan of Chicago. Actually get to rebuild a city. Clearly the inspiration here is Paris, which is being rebuilt at the same time. Paris didn't burn. Paris, they just bulldozed through where people lived in order to create these grand avenues. So Burnham imagined something along these lines with these great avenues that would go through, have these great vistas. Ultimately, not much of it was able to be built, but they did do some remarkable things. One of the things that they were able to do, and this is the late 19th and early 20th century, was reclaim or basically annex the city's waterfront. So one of the things that's remarkable about Chicago, one is it's so beautiful, is it's a concentric city, but it's cut in half. So you get vistas on it. You have a beach, you know, right next to downtown. But then you have about a quarter-mile green space of parks and fountains and things like that, so that you can actually be in the center of a city and then kind of be in parkland, be at the beach, look back, see the city around you. So this is just one particular view. A fountain, again, this is the area, this is looking from the lake. So you have a very much less oppressive kind of feeling that you get if you're in Philadelphia or New York or one of these cities where when you're in the heart of it, you truly are in the heart of it. One of the things they do is they elevate mass transit. So Allison referred a moment ago to the loop. It actually is defined by the elevated train, the L, the downtown area. so that actually you could move people around without interfering with traffic on the street. One of the other things that, that Burnham came up with, they didn't do so much of it, they did some of it, is, this is Lower Wacker Drive, is an underground tier of roads so that commercial traffic could move underground and not interfere with traffic at the street level. And you've seen this because there's a dramatic scene in the Batman movie with Heath Ledger, the great chase scene underground. That's filmed in Lower Wacker Drive. This was part of what Burnham wanted, right? Were these dramatic vistas, right? And this is the Field Museum. One of the things, Chicago, you know, by the late 19th century, as it rebuilds, there's a lot of money in this town. It means there's a lot of philanthropy. There's spectacular museums. This is the Field Museum. That's one of the things in it. But again, you get a sense of the kind of aspirations and both the scale of things and the grandeur with which they're building. Symphony Hall, same thing. One of the great symphonies in the world. Orchestra Hall, it's called. We're going to spend a day here. This is the Chicago Art Institute. Outside of Paris, and maybe, I suppose, outside the Met in New York, this is the greatest art institute in the world. The collections here are just astonishing. Chicago rich people got into French Impressionism when nobody else thought it was interesting. And so they bought up all of these Monets and Van Goghs and Cézannes. This is a Caillebotte. So it's one of the premier collections, certainly the premier collection of French Impressionism outside of France. But also some great American collections. This, of course, you've seen a million times. You've also seen it satirized in every way. I'm sure you could find Michelle Obama and Sarah Palin or whoever else in these things. This is Grant Wood's American Gothic, which is Grant Wood. Remember I showed you Grant Wood earlier of George Washington, The Legend of the Cherry Tree. Remember that painting? Same guy, right? It's a wonderfully ironic sense about the American myths. You know, the Frederick Jackson Turner myths. This is who we really are as America. Well, that's not quite what Frederick Jackson Turner had in mind. This one you've undoubtedly seen too, usually with like James Dean and Humphrey Bogart and Elvis Presley and whatever else. But this is in the Art Institute. This is Edward Hopper's Nighthawks. Absolutely stunning painting. Make sure you see it when you're there. A commentary on the loneliness of urban life is just breathtaking.
Did you do that Boulevard of Broken Dreams?
No, this is the painting. Boulevard of Broken Dreams is the one that they're riffing on this particular painting.
Okay.
Yeah, and so you'll see this, and like, and that person becomes Marilyn Monroe, that sort of thing. Other stuff, it's a steel manufacturing city no longer. You know, a lot of the kind of industrial sinews that I'm discussing here are gone now. There was a steel, big breweries, a lot of beer in Chicago. Also a city of great labor violence. Labor organizing. This refers to, this is a broadside in 1886. This is the day before, this is a broadside for what would become the Haymarket bomb. The Knights of Labor were organizing in Chicago for an 8-hour day. There was a protest at Cyrus McCormick's farm implement work. Police shot a couple of people. This handbill, attention working men, you know, here's a mass meeting tonight to be present to denounce the latest atrocious act of the police, the shooting of our fellow workmen yesterday afternoon. Well, at that night, at the Haymarket, someone who threw a bomb, killed a number of police, became an extraordinary moment in American labor history. A group of anarchists, all foreign, all mustachioed, all looking utterly un-American, were put on trial and executed, some of whom may have been responsible for the bomb. This is just another bit of the kind of labor violence, of the labor strikes of the era. One of the manufacturers there, and this connects with something Allison just said, was the Pullman Company. which made railroad cars. Often these incredibly posh railroad cars. This is the interior of a Pullman Palace car. Now this is of interest, the context here. Here's a Pullman porter making down the bed for the people, because these were sleeper cars as well, right? And these porters would become a very important black unit, Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The first March on Washington, the threat of a March on Washington in 1941, is organized by A. Philip Randolph, who's head of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It was that threat, you'll remember from our session in New Orleans, that led FDR to sign the executive order creating a Fair Employment Practices Committee. Now, part of what's very interesting about this, too, is an awful lot of these people, as Allison suggested, who were porters working on the railroad, became very important messengers of this world in the North, and became very important. Here in Macomb, one of the most important figures in the Civil Rights Movement who we'll learn about was a man named C.C. Bryan. And C.C. Bryan was an employee of the Illinois Central Railroad. One of the reasons that railroad employees were particularly important in the early days of civil rights struggle here in Mississippi was because they weren't employed locally. So they weren't vulnerable to the kinds of economic pressures that were brought against people locally who were trying to work with. I know I'm flying here. So Pullman created his factory, decided the best way to avoid the kind of labor, he hated organized labor, the kind of labor agitation that was troubling other industries, was he would create a model town. So he created an entire town for his workers. Everything. Churches, the recreation halls, the housing, the stores, they all lived in Pullman. And it was supposed to be this model of harmony and so forth. It actually became a center in 1893-94 of one of the most dramatic strikes. What happened after the Panic of 1893 was Pullman arbitrarily cut everyone's wages by half. They were already working 12-hour days, and rents in the town and prices in the company stores were unchanged. And so a group of his workers went to meet with him to discuss this, and they were all fired. The next day, there was a wildcat strike at Pullman. The National Guard was called in. Eventually, they prosecuted the Railway Workers Union